Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay. I had a few technical issues again, trying to start the webinar. Hopefully everyone is here. Without further ado, I think we've got a few participants in the room. Thank you very much for being patient and waiting for James and myself to join. James was on earlier than myself, so my fault. This is the penultimate series, I think, of the criteria sessions we've got for open work. Today we are going to cover, again, part of specialist buy-to-let, we're going to cover trading limited companies. And how we're going to do that is by looking at the difference between what we class a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, and what is a trading limited company. And some of the benefits you have, because Landbay are now on panel with open work to actually have another lender that offer an alternative where an SPV limited company lender may not fit the required bill. So today we are going to discuss with the agenda I'll pull up shortly. Sorry, with the agenda, we're going to discuss, again, a bit of housekeeping, specialist tax advice, making sure that the client is obviously receiving some advice before you can get into the realms of discussion of the company. We're going to discuss the difference between, on a light touch, between SPV and trading limited companies. We'll look at the criteria that we have behind trading companies. We'll look at some pros and cons when it looks at the risk and the price, or the pricing and the risk of that type of criteria we offer. We're going to have a quick look back at the changing structures that we saw in a couple of kind of criteria clinics ago, where we looked at different layers of structures. Obviously, that's one thing that Landbay are very good at. We're going to look at some underwriting and housekeeping, and we're going to do a little case study. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit more criteria, and we're going to talk about the very exciting news on Monday that we launched a cracking 5-year fixed rate open work exclusive, and we'll kind of touch base with that later in the presentation. So as I say, today you've got myself, Ian Hall, head of sales for the North, and I'd like James, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm James. I'm the portfolio team lead here at Landbay, so dealing mainly with larger portfolio applications and stuff more at the more complex end, as it were.
As I said in many other presentations, I've worked with James a long time, and all our underwriters know their stuff, but James is specifically and really kind of on board with many of the different challenges that we get thrown in the specialist lending environment we are in buy-to-let. So without further ado, let's move on and let's talk about sorry, I keep on pressing the wrong button. Let's talk about, first of all, kind of setting the scenes. We all know, and this is drilled in every day, and there's no harm for repeating this over and over again. I think the importance of making sure that the client takes advice from specialist taxation or accountants prior to making any decisions when it comes to limited company lending. I just wanted to highlight the importance maybe of looking at the top of the screen on the left-hand side. Might kind of give a good example of an existing relationship a client might have. A landlord got 2 or 3 properties. They've always used the same bookkeeper to do their books. I think in this day and age, with regard to the way that taxation is changing, that limited companies are becoming more and more complex, I do believe that it's worth making sure that that client is getting the right advice from the right person, making sure that maybe they're paying the right fees, to make sure that that accountant or tax specialist has actually got some outside of knowledge of the changes that have occurred when it comes to buy-to-let lending. So make sure they get the right advice, not necessarily the cheapest advice. So, SPV versus trading. SPV stands for Special Purpose Vehicle. We've got to allow around 4 SIC codes that we allow. The most typical SIC code that we allow on an SPV is 68209, which is called letting and operating of own or leased property. That means that that limited company only has one thing in its limited company, which is property. The rental property, or perhaps a short-term let property, rental property full stop, that basically produces income. The income goes into the limited company, and obviously corporation tax is paid on that limited company. Usually an SPV can be set up from day one, and the usual the SPV reason is usually property. There are things that can change with regard to the setup being changed. We'll move on to that in a later slide to show how that can be accommodated by Landbay. Now, the difference is trading limited companies. It can be any trading limited company. The examples below: the developers, building developers, doctors, IT, consultants, architects, and we've also had many inquiries from brokers who day to day give financial advice, mortgage broking advice, and actually, because of the profits they have within that business, may decide to obviously buy property, land and property within that business rather than looking to set up another limited company. The one thing we do exclude is charities. Basically, charities are, I suppose, they are a trading business, but obviously there's risks attached to trading to charities, obviously from a kind of brand ourselves, an image issue potentially if we're repossessing the property. We don't want to be doing that from a charity, so we're very careful with regard to excluding charities. And charities normally have lots and lots of directors and non-exec directors, etc. So it does make the kind of structure very complex. Typically, what you're looking at a trading company, they've got liabilities away from property. So therefore, if you're an IT consultant, you might have a big contract with Dell or Apple. Obviously, that's a liability that is within the business. And as an underwriting team, they would have a look at the liabilities that are there from the trading business to make sure that obviously there's no kind of liabilities that would cause us problems. The clients are not likely to want to bring or introduce a property into a business that's suffering. And obviously our criteria is such that we don't really want that happening either. Usually you've got a longer period of trading when it comes to a limited company that's been trading, typically because a trading company has to build up the profits to be able to then buy property. We require at Landbay 2 years history. Again, we'll move on to criteria very shortly. So we do normally see, rather than being on an SPV, we'd accept a day one setup. But when we're looking at trading companies, we expect a trading history because that's where the profits are built up from. And again, it's usually not started as a property company. As I say, a property company could then become an IT consultant. So the SPV could move into a trading kind of environment by adding further SIC codes. But usually it's the other way around, where it's an IT business potentially who they've got surplus funds in the business and then move into property as a way to kind of use the funds that are sitting there, not actually earning any interest in the bank, obviously producing an income from those surplus funds. So this is the pros and cons and the risks and bits and bobs, and it's just a discussion point here. Typically an SPV, the special purpose vehicle that we lend to, is because it only does property, it's fairly protected. So there's no other liabilities. For example, there are no kind of debt with Dell, or there's no car debts for hire purchase vehicles, typically in an SPV for a car auctioneer, etc. It's only typically the finance for the loans they take for property. You're normally getting the lowest rates in the market. There's more availability of lenders, so our peer group and lenders, the majority will do SPVs. Apologies, that should say multiple accountants. Typically, when you've got an SPV set up, it might be the clients have obviously got a trading company and they've set up an SPV to manage their property. That means actually the accountant's got to do 2 sets of accounts for that client, which again adds a little bit of cost. Even though the rates are lower, it does add a little bit of cost and kind of administration. The movement of money sometimes can be a little bit more difficult. The movement of money into the limited company to obviously buy those assets, where there is a benefit from trading limited companies, because obviously if we're lending to a trading company, all the money is actually within the business already. So the trading company kind of features, you've obviously got, as I said before, the underwriters will have to take on board contingent liabilities, which is the risks away from just lending to that property. Does that company make profit? Are there excessive debts, etc., etc.? The good thing for trading companies, there are less accounts required because the monies that are built up don't then have to be moved into an SPV. We can obviously lend within that trading body. Therefore, the funds are simply in the bank account already, ready for the deposit for the purchase of the property. So it's an easy allocation for money, as I say. However, one thing you've got to bear in mind, there are fewer lenders in the market space at present. So I think you've got maybe two other lenders on your panel that would allow trading companies. Whereas if you look at the SPV, I'd suggest there's maybe up to 8 or 10 lenders that offer limited company lending. So as that, because of the risks with regards to the contingent liabilities, you normally do find that the rates are higher when it comes to trading companies. Our differential is around 0.5%, so it's 0.5% more expensive to do a trading limited company with Landbay than it is a standard SPV. Therefore, that's got to be taken into account when you are looking at these factors. Criteria. Our criteria, with exception for the trading history, is exactly the same as it is for SPV. We require 2 years trading history when we are looking at a lending to a trading company. And to reiterate, that's because we want to see that the limited company we're lending to is actually profitable. We wouldn't want to be lending to a company that's losing money, because they may continue losing money, which is obviously not a good avenue to go down. And obviously the clients are probably not going to want to introduce an asset into a company that's losing money. It may be a good idea for them to obviously separate those assets away from the trading company that's making a loss. So I say we want to see it's profitable. We'll do the same. We'll allow up to 4 applicants on the limited company application. We do need all directors, and this is something that may be a little bit more difficult for trading companies, because you tend to get an awful lot more directors. The example on the left-hand side is from a dental practice, ABC Dental. You've probably got 4 or 5 dentists that are going to be the full-on dentists, and obviously they're probably going to be directors. That would then be excluded from trading a limited company because there's too many directors. So again, all directors have to be subject to the mortgage application, and anyone that's got larger than 25% shares in that limited company. The example on the left-hand side, me and James are the dentists in this operation here. We've got a son and a daughter between us both. The setup here is that James and I would have to be on the limited company because we're both directors and we both have 30% shares. But our children, who own 20% each, would not have to, because one, they're not directors and they don't own more than 25% shares in the limited company. I've said intercompany loans are accepted. Again, that could be from a holding company. It's typically more relevant when you're looking at lending to an SPV, because actually the intercompany loans are normally from the trading limited company into the SPV. We allow up to 95 years of age. And again, SIT codes, we're fairly generous, obviously, with SIT code when it comes to trading limited company. Yeah, just bear that in mind. I say it is worth, when you've got an unusual trading company, maybe give us a shout and we'll investigate. It's always worth looking at the account in advance, I'd say, because there is a little bit more underwriting that is involved, as I've repeated before.
We do need them to add a property-related SIT code on completion as well in trading companies. So if they haven't got a property-related SIT code currently, we just need to have them to add one by the time the loan completes, which most accountants can update usually within 24, 48 hours at a company's house. So.
And a limited company can typically have up to 4 SIC codes. So therefore, there is that ability to hopefully add that SIT code onto the relevant limited company. The good thing, and something that we differentiate, because the mainstay of trading, lending to trading limited companies probably is in the commercial environment, from Lloyds and Barclays and all the kind of commercial lenders in this market space. And usually they will do floating charges and debentures on the limited company. However, the big difference in the attractiveness with regard to Landbay and potentially your clients is that we don't do floating charges or debentures. We don't do them on SPVs, but more relevant, we don't do them on trading limited companies. As I say, you normally find them on trading limited companies. So that is a huge, huge benefit. We do the usual personal guarantees. However, we don't do floating charges or debentures, any other fixed charge apart from the first charge on the asset.
Yeah, and also on that, what we do is we take a negative pledge on the security company's house. So that ring fences the property from the floating charge and any debenture. So if they were to call it in, then the security is kept separate. And also what is pretty much standard practice with floating charge and debentures, any lender looking to lend gets a letter of non-crystallization from the debenture or floating charge holder, which confirms at the time of completion they hadn't basically called it in. So that's nothing that will need it up front. It's all covered in the post offer stuff. The solicitors just get that as pretty much as a formality prior to completion.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Very good point. And this just it gives an example of again, the fact we allow layered limited companies when it comes to trading businesses as well. So what you might find typically is ABC Holdings. Maybe the clients have got many different limited companies, one of them being ABC Developers. That'll become relevant in my case study example later down the slides. Essentially, even though the shares for ABC Developers are owned by the holding company, Landbay can still look to lend to ABC Developers. Because again, we look at the ultimate beneficial ownership of ABC Developers, and we'll see that in this example here, the mother and the father are shareholders and directors in the holding company. The sons and daughters are also shareholders in the holding company. But because the father and the mother own 30% and are directors, they would be the only ones subject to the mortgage application.
Yeah, we will look at company structures that do go 2, 3, 4, 5 company deep. So as long as we can understand who the ultimate owner is and we've essentially got them on the application, then we can get comfortable. So anything that goes 2 or 3, 4 companies deep, then as long as we can understand it, we're happy to send the details over through BDM. We can track it through Companies House and whatever to find out the ownership and whether we can get comfortable.
So just the housekeeping to reiterate on trading companies, again, flexibility. So if you're looking at placing an SPV deal and you notice there's a SIC code that's on there that the lender doesn't accept, usually Landbay can accept it. So therefore SIC code flexibility is keen with us on that point. So for example, and this is quite common, you've got an IT company who obviously were very profitable through the years, and that IT business has got surplus funds of around 100 to 150,000 pound in the business. That client is now retired, but then to take that 150,000 pound out of the business can be very, very expensive, especially when they have just retired and probably have still some kind of income coming in from other kind of funds. Obviously, the 150,000 pounds sits there, and obviously we know that income, that the return on the Bank of England, the return on funds that is held in the bank, i.e. the interest rate is, 0.01%. Obviously, the benefit would be for that IT developer to perhaps add a SIC code for that business. And if they are not trading in that IT business anymore because they have retired, actually, we will then consider that an SPV, as long as we know that there is no further trading in that IT business. So the benefit there is that the £150,000, instead of earning diddly squat in a current account, will actually then earn a good return based on the fact that limited company has invested the money into a property and obviously generates the rental income from that property. Again, there's no debentures and floating charges in the background. That's a really key point. And obviously from an underwriting point of view, that limited company has got to be profitable. Okay. The next slide, I'm going to move on, not from this side, I'm going to give the case study first. So the case study example I've got here for a trading limited company is ABC Property Developers have built a row of 6 houses, as you can see on the left-hand side. They sold 4 off on long leases or freeholds. They've split the title between all 6 properties, but they have 2 remaining. And the 2 remaining, basically, they don't need to obviously sell all of the properties to obviously bring them in the money that they need for maybe the next development. They want to retain some because they see that the properties they built were very attractive, and there's other benefits to this area in the future. That developer may want to, for business reasons, retain 2 of the properties, and with Landbay, we would allow them to do that because they have no intention of stopping developing properties. They've all got a site across the road potentially. They've got another site that's land banked. Obviously, we will allow that company to then remortgage those 2 properties they want to retain and move that money that they've remortgaged onto the next deal. And the reason being is because Landbay will accept capital raise purposes for business purposes. Again, I missed the point there about the SIC codes. So the SIC code for this limited company includes 68209. As James said before, every limited company, every trading limited company we lend to must have a SIC code relevant to property, but also, and will continue to have, the SIC code which is relevant to development of building projects, which is 41100, which, if you look at the mainstay of lenders that do SPV, would not be allowed. This is a good example of, obviously, well, a good example of trading a limited company, the ability for Landbay to consider trading companies. Again, with trading companies, we can accept day one refinance. It could be an example for the ABC property developers, again, where they've got a few houses on the go where they've built from ground up, but also could be developers where they've kind of refurbished properties from top to bottom, because the developers, obviously they've got tradesmen on hand. Therefore, the turnaround, if they buy a property at £100,000, they spend £25,000, £30,000 on that property, and it's then worth more money within the 6 months, we can refinance at the new value within that 6 months. We covered that last week, so hopefully there's a few kind of pertinent points there. We lend above commercial at 75% LTV. We don't like noisy and smelly, but obviously 75% LTV above commercial is quite attractive. If you've not seen before, have a look for our green products. The green products, unfortunately, are excluded when it comes to trade limited companies. But if you have individual or standalone SPV lending, the green products we have are very, very competitive. And again, James will reiterate this. I'll let James put this on.
I was just going to, I've had a couple of questions that I've answered in the Q&A, but I was just going to go sort of reiterate about trusts as shareholders in companies. We're finding it more common on SPVs for IHT planning and stuff that there are trusts that hold shares, but as I said, if the trust owns less than 25% of the shares, we can ignore it. But also, if the trust's shares don't have any voting rights, then we can look to ignore it. We just need to have the majority of the shareholders that actually have the voting rights and the controlling stake in the company. I know it's becoming more and more common to have trusts on there, but so we can look at that. We just need to, again, understand who has control of the company and if we can get comfortable with it. We did have a scenario the other week where there was a trust set up that did have a controlling stake, and it couldn't get rid of the voting rights because that's where the value was attached to it. But they did manage to rejig the amount of shares the trust held slightly, and then added one of the children onto the application who was old enough to then not to keep the tax benefit and for us to still be able to do the remortgages for them. So yeah, it's becoming more common. They just need to make sure they also get decent advice from their accountant, that it doesn't hinder the limited company from a lending point of view. Because you do get quite a few instances where the applicants get great tax advice and put certain things in place to benefit them and their families later in life, but it can hinder them here and now if they obviously want to leverage their existing portfolio.
Thank you, James. I think that hopefully reiterates the point on that slide there, that you get direct access to the likes of James Cooper Smith. It really does make a difference when you're looking at trying to place a case. And the case that James spoke about then, James was directly involved with regard to making sure that we're looking for a way to lend rather than a way to say no to a case as well. It doesn't fit with every scenario, but obviously that's what we're here for, to try and give you an idea of what we can and what we can't do. The 5-year fixed rates that we offer, including the exclusive that I'm about to show you, are all at pay rate, which again, for the larger loan sizes, makes a real difference and makes the ability for maybe the lower yielding properties to obviously still obtain the right LTVs, which include up to 80% LTV as well. Unfortunately, just to reiterate, the maximum LTV on a trading limited company currently is 75%. So yeah, I just want to obviously highlight on Monday, we've got a lot of business in from Openwork already, but I think what we promised when we came onto panel is that we would provide an exclusive, and I think we've done that in a very competitive manner. We've got a 5-year exclusive available via Openwork for individuals and limited companies, and against our peer group, when it comes to limited company lending, the 2.94 rate with a 1.5 completion fee is one of the most competitive, and if not the most competitive 5-year fixed rate on the market at this time. The minimum loan amount is set a little bit higher at £150,000 with a maximum loan amount of 1.5 million, which again is worth reiterating because there's not many lenders that are happy to go to 75% of 1.5 million. the majority of lenders in our space normally cut off at 75% at maybe 750 or £1 million. Again, at Landbay, you can go all the way to 1.5 million. And again, going to 1.5 million, you need to make sure that pay rate works. And a 2.94 pay rate with a calculation rate, for example, of 125 in a limited company can make that work. We also have a remortgage special as well with a cashback, which is again 2.94, the completion fee of 1.5, again it's a 1.5 million and lending at 75%, but obviously offers that little kind of incentive for the cost of the legals, with the cashback being paid post-completion. The only thing it excludes, unfortunately, the topic today, unfortunately, it would be excluded. We don't do trading companies, and we do also exclude new builds. So hopefully that is going to come up on your radar, your research. If you've done any research lately and you're about to place a case for another lender, have a little look out for that. It's a cracking product. It won't be around for a long time because there is a lot of pressure with many lenders kind of moving rates up and down within short space of time. So do keep an eye on that product in the next couple of weeks. And that's all we have for today. I think James has kindly answered all the questions. Did we have any other questions in, Mr. Cooper-Smith?
Nothing at the moment.
No?
No.
Any other questions before we bring it to a close? No. Again, if you need a CPD certificate, please drop me an email. I think Nicholas sent the invites out for the webinar. By all means, email Nick, or you can drop me an email, ian.hall@landbay.co.uk, and I will organise a CPD certificate to be sent out for today's session. Apologies for the tardiness in the starting the presentation. We're doing a wrap up next week of all the bits and pieces with regard to criteria. So please do try and join us for the last session at 2 p.m. next week. I may also do a little giveaway, you never know, in regard to a little incentive and maybe some interesting things we can discuss next week. Thanks for listening.